Hello and welcome to Conversations with. I'm Courtney.
And I'm Keith.
And we're the clinical team here at Burtons Academy. With our combined passion for monitoring and ventilation, we're here to rewind and remind you on the foundations and principles used to form the knowledge and understanding in everyday anaesthesia. And in this week's episode, we're taking some time before we jump into our clinical podcasts just to introduce ourselves so that you can get to know us better. My name's Courtney. I'm the clinical educator in anaesthesia here at Burtons. And today I'm sitting down with Keith, who is our clinical director. And Keith qualified as a vet. You qualified in the 80s. So what have you been doing between then and now?
Hi, Courtney. Yes, thanks for that. Obviously, it's been quite a long path. You're right. I qualified from Oxford University in '86, and I thought then that my path was quite destined. I was going to get a job in a mixed practice in Devon or Cornwall, work there for a few years, become a partner, and then that was it. My life was kind of predetermined from that point. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing is, life just, you never know where it's going to go. So I did get that job in Devon. I ended up working in Bideford for my first job on the North Coast and absolutely loved it. I love mixed animal practice. I did cattle work, pig work, bit of horses, sheep, and the small animal. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then, life throws you a curveball. And my curveball then was my wife, who I met. And she dragged me from North Devon down to South Devon. So I went down to South Devon and left all the large animal stuff behind me and started working in practice in Torquay. So I was there for, sorry, she dragged me from North Devon to Bristol first.
Back to Bristol then?
Back to Bristol, yeah. And I worked in the, what was Highcroft, which is now obviously a well-known practice. At the time, it was just me, Richard Cullen and Hugh Lovejones. And again, a lovely period of life to work in a practice. It was relaxed. I was working with farmers that I knew because I grew up in the area. So I was there for a year or so. And then, yes, I did get dragged down to South Devon when I met Jill. And we got married and set up in Torquay. And I started in small animal practice down there. And yeah, thoroughly enjoyed being a small animal practitioner. But there's always been this thing. I've always had a passion for electronics, and it's always been there. And I sort of paid my way through university by mending stuff for people and that sort of thing. And I just started picking it up again. And I had a case one night. It was cat RTA about midnight, and went in to deal with it and thought about it. It was quite stable, but it was one I thought I really ought to try and repair. Now there was a massive diaphragmatic hernia, so I thought I'm going to reduce this and sort this one out. So I did. We operated, we reduced it, stitched it up, and it was actually doing really well. And then about an hour later, went to the cage and it was dead. So one of those sort of turning points in my life, really, because I'd already rung the owner and said it was, come through the operation was looking good. But the owner was very understanding, so I managed to, with their permission, do a post-mortem, get some stuff sent off histology. And the interesting thing was the damage in the lung wasn't RTA damage. The damage in the lung was pulmonary edema, probably in retrospect due to improper ventilation of that lung. Mm-hmm. So that kind of got me thinking at that point. So what could I do? How can I avoid this? So I actually designed a tiny little ventilator, which is now the SAV03 or 04, so that we could pressure cycle and avoid extra pressure being developed in those lungs. So designed this little thing, got a local engineering company to make it up, got a very, very crude prototype going. And at the time, I was also working down in Plymouth with colleagues at Elm Cottage. And we had the opportunity to try it a few times, and it seemed to work well. So I then did something I've never done before, which was write a little article for the Vet Times. And that got picked up by some people. And what I really hadn't anticipated is people came and said, "Can I buy one?" And I thought,
I was going to ask, how did it go from something that you wanted in practice to someone else hearing about it and going, "Well, I want one of those for my practices"?
Yeah, well, it hadn't really crossed my mind, stupidly, but people did want to buy one. So I made a few. I made a few in my garage and started selling them, which was a whole new concept to me completely.
Mm-hmm.
But they got pretty well received, and I sold one to the International Zoo Veterinary Group, probably in about 1994, and they loved it, and they championed it, and they sort of talked about it, and then the sales just sort of kept going. So that was the SAVO1 as it was a very, very different beast. It looked completely different. I had to put all the lettering on by hand, set all the different things on, and make them in the garage and what have you.
Wow. I'd love to see a picture of this.
Yeah, well, now
of what it looks like.
pictures, and there is actually one model left of the SAVO1 that I've got in my sort of collection. So, so it's still around. So they started to go, and then I thought, well, actually, I enjoy this. So I wanted then to pick up my my electronics. I thought, well, it's okay being a vet, and I have my qualifications, but nothing to prove my understanding or my electronics abilities. So I went back to college. Did an HNC at the local college, and I did the 2-year course in 6 months, and passed that with distinction. So I was really pleased about that. That gave me my entry into the membership of the Institute of Electronic Engineers, as it was then. It's now the IET, Institute of Electronic Technology. So I did that, and then that led on to another course at electronics course at Exeter University, where I started a master's in electronics as well, and that led me into all new things about electromagnetic compatibility, EMC regulations, design considerations, and it was a really exciting point of my life. So at this point, I got to the stage where I was, running the business, which was selling little ventilators and some X-ray viewers, and decided to give up full-time practice and do locums for people. So I was locuming 4 days a week through local practices in Devon, and then I dropped that to 3, and then dropped it to 2, and then in 2000, I decided to take the plunge and just work on the business alone. That was a scary moment, giving up all that security of income to just start a business from your garage and see what happens. But I did. I thought we'd give it 6 months and see what happens. And of course, here we are, 22 years later,
That's amazing.
and things are very different. So basically, cut a long story short, at that point I started working from home. I then ramped up my production. I was making more and more small animal ventilators. I'd also had a European grant to make another small animal ventilator, the Merlin ventilator, and that started being sold. And just began to build it up from there. And then I took some offices in the local in the town in Torquay, and then started to employ some people. And the business grew, and I moved premises, and the thing grew and grew. And then, as I suppose what happens to a lot of people, is that the business got bigger than I was. In the last 4 or 5 years, it was to the point where the business controlled me rather than the other way around. So I was now running around Europe. I developed a large animal ventilator with Stetson Hallowell in the States. I was servicing that one, training on that one. We were selling quite a few of those. The business got really, really busy. And I thought, well, I love this in a sense. I don't love it as much as when I was working in my garage. So that was the kind of signal that I needed to get back to my roots of designing, combining knowledge of physiology, knowledge of physics and electronics to design things again. And the opportunity came up to sell the company. So I talked to David Burton for a number of years before we came to an agreement, and then eventually sold the company in November 2020. And what's happened now is a big door has opened now, because what I've wanted to do for years is design new equipment, and I've got lots of ideas for new things. But also, I've felt through the last few years and what I've seen with the teaching and training I've done, that ventilation isn't particularly well either understood or taught. And I think what I like to do is teach the fundamentals, why things are done, and then you build on those foundations, those fundamentals to improve your knowledge and your control of the equipment you've got. So I'm very passionate about the fact that I want to this clinical team get a team together that we can now start to support the equipment that Burtons is now selling as part of the Vectronic range, plus the other stuff they've got, and also to get out there and start giving people my ideas and thoughts on ventilation, how to ventilate, the pros and cons of ventilation. There's such a lot to do, and develop new products along the way. So in a nutshell, that's how I've ended up where I am. And I now have on my plate far more projects and ideas than I have ever had. And the opportunity.
I bet you're up all night with a notebook, writing down every kind of thought that comes into your head. I'm sure you've got a big old list. You flip over your notepad and you quickly write that idea down.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now that you're not having to sort of sit behind a desk and do all of the admin, you're back designing, thinking, progressing.
Exactly, that's exactly how it is. So, so huge number of ideas. Amazing opportunity here at Burtons, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this podcast about what we're going to be offering. But that's kind of my journey. As I said, wasn't planned. All
the good things are never planned. All the good things are spontaneous.
Exactly. Yeah, you never know what's going to come along. Yeah. So you just take opportunities as they arise. I mean, I wouldn't say it's been easy. It's been tough sometimes. Particularly a new business. And when we got married, we were in negative equity for years. But it's been a huge amount of fun. A lot of great people.
Well, I guess you got to combine the best of both worlds, really, because you had your vet degree, and one of your hobbies growing up, I'm assuming, is tinkering around with, old bits of equipment and clocks, making them work again, making old record players work again. So you did your vet degree, and then you get to combine best of both worlds, and almost as a hobby, really. Now your job is just a roll-on effect from what you have always loved doing.
Yeah, it's a combination of the two
best
passions,
of both
really.
worlds. Yeah, I think some people are, fortunate when they get to do that. Not everyone gets to wake up every day and be full of ideas and get to go to work and implement them and have everyone else around them excited. Like, I know every time you talk to me about a piece of equipment, I get really excited, and I didn't even know I was going to be excited about it when I saw it in a box. So once you taught me quite a lot on how to understand how things work. And I think that's the same for me as a nurse. If you plonked a ventilator in front of me and said, flick a few switches and the patient will breathe, I'm going to really want to understand the fundamental and the basics as to why that makes a patient breathe, and what effect is it having on our patient, and how can we make sure it's going to be the best thing for our patient. So for me, I think even I wake up now quite excited about learning and what we're going to bring to industry as well. I hope we get to share the same amount. Like, you've made me excited about ventilation and doing the best for our patients. So I hope that's what we can go forward with our clinical team here at Burtons as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think, it is a very exciting time. And ventilation monitoring, all those subjects are incredibly interesting. And they have a lot of, absolute fact and physiology behind them. So it's not an art. It is truly a science. And, if we understand that science, then we can really do the best for our patients.
Yeah. And it's less scary as well when you understand something. It's not so scary.
Exactly. Yeah. So, that's obviously quite a lot about me, but what about yourself, Courtney? We're now working together as a clinical team, but I'm not too sure about your background and where it all began for you. So maybe you can just kind of give us a rundown of where it started for you.
Yeah. So I think I'm very much the same when I hear about your story, that it sort of, I never had this plan that I was going to end up on the other side of the world, loving anaesthesia. I knew that I always loved animals. I worked as a kennel assistant in a really big kennel and cattery. And actually, it's funny because there was a vet clinic next door to that. And I never looked in because I really didn't like surgery. And I thought maybe I could do, I have a very medical family, an emergency-based family, so police and paramedics. So I thought, I really like animals, and maybe I can do something emergency-based with them. And then I took one look in the surgery, and it was a dog castrate. And I took one look at the dog castrate, and then I had a nice look at the roof when I'd fainted. So it was always going to be a bit of a fun career getting into vet med. So I went to uni in New Zealand, in Auckland, a very kind of small animal-based teaching is what I had. So I never really went on to many farms or anything like that. I was kind of the Auckland City campus. And then I went into general practice for quite a number of years. I stayed in my first practice, which I think a number of us nurses do that. It's nice and it's comfortable and we know the team and it's a safe place to grow. And I was really fortunate to be in that kind of environment. And I did like anaesthesia, and I think I liked anaesthesia at the time because it was methodical. I was very good at saying, okay, if this is happening to the patient, I could branch off on 4 different paths as to how to troubleshoot that. So at this stage, I didn't know that that was where my passion lay, because I also liked doing x-rays. I also liked doing dental work, for example. And then after a couple of years, I must have been kind of like early 20s. So I would have spent about 6 or 7, I started my first job at 18 in a vet clinic. So yeah, maybe I was about 5 or 6 years out of uni. I went and did an office-based job, still within the veterinary industry, and I did sort of sales and marketing. And I think marketing I really loved because I was able to get other people excited about what we were trying to bring in their clinic. So at the end of, I was there for about 1.5 years, and then I went back into practice because I really did start to miss the animals. And by then I had realized I definitely wanted to pursue anaesthesia. So I used to follow quite a lot of people on online forums at that stage. It wasn't when social media was very big. So I followed quite a lot of people on online forums and got to listen to them talk about anaesthesia and their day. And I thought, oh, that's actually quite cool. So I ended up in Australia. So I really wanted to do anaesthesia and at least pursue it. So I ended up, I kind of had a glass of wine one night and I felt very confident. And I'd emailed a couple of practices in Australia and said, hey, I'd really like to do some anaesthesia. Maybe I could come over and see what these big hospitals are like, because we really didn't have, at this stage in New Zealand, we didn't really have very big hospitals. I think when I left the country, there was 1 university hospital and maybe only 2 or 3 referral practices in the whole country. And I thought it was a good excuse to move to Australia. So I had an interview with a big hospital in Queensland, and then I hung up from that interview and they said, we'd really like you to have the second stage interview. Would you like to come over and work in our anaesthesia team for the day, and we can just get to know you, you can get to know us. And I thought, oh, okay, the ball is rolling. I kind of like pushed the ball off the cliff and now I've got to run after it. So I was like, okay, let's go. And when I got to Australia, I didn't really, I slept on a couch of a sister's friend. So I ended up in Australia in this really big hospital for a week. I ended up staying there and I just saw what they were doing anaesthesia-wise. And I'd never seen a ventilator before in my life. I never really even had placed an ECG by then. And I just got to see this really high level anaesthesia. I thought it was so interesting. So I got back on the plane, landed in New Zealand. I got phone calls from them saying that they would love for me to join their team. So within a month, I had sold everything I owned. I had booked my 2 cats on a flight and I had moved to Brisbane. And I really, really enjoyed my time there. And then I ended up booking another one-way ticket, which was to the UK. And I thought, if there's another step from being in Australia, it will be going to work. And I had planned, at least I had this part planned in my career. I was like, I'm going to move to the UK and I'm going to work at the Royal Veterinary College. I'm going to work in their anaesthesia department, which I was very naive because there was a few things I didn't realise. I didn't realise you had to be registered to work in the UK.
That was your ambition. That wasn't decided. That's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, I knew.
Predetermined or anything, no?
No, I only knew I had got the taste for anaesthesia in Australia, and I had become a bit more confident. And then when I was moving to the UK, which was a little bit unexpected, I knew that once I landed in the UK, I wanted to work at the RVC. Okay. So I knew just that bit. So I had been emailing about jobs. So there was 2 things really when I turned up in the UK. I didn't realise you had to be registered, and you can't just email these clinics saying, "Oh, I'd love to work for you," like I had done in Australia. So I ended up Moving to the UK, getting registered. So I landed in March and I was registered by June. So I was very fortunate and very nervous to do your OSCEs after being a nurse for 10 years. I thought, what bad practice. And, I did 10 stations. And of all the stations, I flustered and panicked at fresh gas flows, which is now my everyday life and one of the things I absolutely love talking to people on. That was the one I got really caught up on, and I heard the 30-second warning bell when I did my OSCEs, and I had done all my calculations wrong. It was funny. It's just the one thing I really wanted to do, and I got so panicky by the time I was doing my OSCEs that I managed to just get my answer in before the station ended. So I had, I ticked that box. I became registered, and then it was a long wait to get a job at the RVC. So I waited then a year and a half for the job at the RVC to come up, the anaesthesia job. And then when it did, I applied straight away, and I was actually on holiday at the time, and I flew back from my holiday just for the day to do the interview. And then I flew back to where my mum was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was not letting this opportunity go. But in those 2 years, so between getting registered and then finally becoming a job at the RVC, I didn't want all of this knowledge and excitement that I had learnt to disappear or just to fade. So that's when I found the Improve International Anaesthesia course. So that was the year and a half. So that's how I ended up getting my nurse's certificate in anaesthesia. So I didn't want my passion to die. I wanted to be ready for that job, and I wanted to keep everything relevant in my head because I had spent the 2 years locuming around London. And sometimes you end up in a practice for a week or a month, but they might not have the equipment, and so you think, oh no, I'm going to lose touch, I'm going to lose my knowledge. So that's how I ended up starting my social media pages. So selfishly, I made the social media pages as just a way for me to brain dump all of my fun facts. I find that I learn quite well if I read it and absorb it, and then if I get to tell someone else about it, I find it quite solidifies in my mind. So that's sort of how the social media pages started, was just a way for me to get my fun facts out. And I thought if anyone else is interested, then they can join me on this little journey that I was, sharing all of the facts.
Yeah. And so did your marketing experience, your marketing training, did that help you with that, setting up that social media?
I don't think so. When I was doing my marketing role, what I was doing was receiving from the clinical team, I guess like vaccination promotions, or it was dental month. And so with the marketing job, I was actually the middleman between the clinical idea and then implementing it in practice. So I think I like organization anyway, and I like the process of making something easy, and I like to make people excited anyway. Even if you tell me you're going on a holiday, I'm going to get excited for you and show you where I've been, and maybe you'll also like it. So I think that was just who I was as a person. So when I started up the social media, I think that was just me being me, if that makes sense. It wasn't any kind of formal.
But that engendered quite a following for you, didn't it?
Yeah, it did actually. It became more than anything I ever thought it was going to be. It very much is just my brain at that moment in time. If I see something really cool in my day, I would take a picture of it and then share it with someone else, because I think by sharing what I know or what makes me excited and what my passion, who's going to benefit from that? So people I work with, so my colleagues, are going to benefit from that. They're going to have learned something new. They're going to see that anaesthesia is exciting, that we're in a really cool profession. And then the other part of who's going to benefit from that is the patient. And since we all get in this for the patient, I think that's probably why it took off so much, if that makes sense. I was so excited, and then people were like, whoa, she's excited about this. I'm excited about that, actually. And then it benefits our patients. So I can't see how any of it was a negative.
I think you think along the same lines that I do. I think there's a real thirst for anaesthesia knowledge and anaesthesia out there that for some reason isn't being fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we can share that passion and excitement, it makes everyone else excited and comfortable. And I'll always remember when I was learning to drive and I went on the motorway, I was freaking out. I was like, there are about 50 cars on this motorway. And my driving instructor said, all you need to worry about is what's in the front of you, like the car in front and the car behind. And then everything else kind of, I was like, oh, yeah, of course. I just need to worry really about those two things. I don't need to worry about the 50 things. And I kind of think it's the same with anesthesia as well. You can be like, well, what if this happens, and what if that happens? And it's no, let's just right in front of us. We've made our plan. We know that we're going in to do the bitch spay. This is expected. Everything's going to be okay. So I found that in order for me to feel reassured with what I was doing, I then saw the panic in some other people and my colleagues. I'd be like, no, it's okay. The worst thing that's going to happen is, we might just have to give it a few breaths. It's literally, it's going to be okay. So I ended up, I think, being kind of like a, what do you call, like a mother hen? So I'd be like, no, it's okay. As long as you just if you do this properly, and we know that could happen. So I think that's also what I ended up doing through my social media pages. And then when I went and worked at a teaching hospital, so I did finally get that RVC job, and I was there for 4 years, and I absolutely loved it. So every 2 weeks there was new students coming in, touching the vaporizer for the first time or doing their first intubation. And we just got to take it slow. It was like, no, just worry about the car in front and the car behind. Don't worry about what's going to happen in 4 hours' time when we have to extubate it. Right now, let's just focus on getting the ET tube in now. So I really enjoyed that. And I think that's what I'm excited about when I joined the Burtons team only in December, is that together, you and I, we get to share our passion and our excitement, and really practically as well. We're not just going to, we're going to do this real world learning. I would struggle to recite and narrate what you could just read in a book. It's going to be really, I learn better if I'm standing in front of a whiteboard drawing, or you're holding the piece of equipment and going through it. And that's what I am really looking forward to about being part of the Burtons team, is we're going to go out and do that for the industry.
Yeah, I think you and I have got a great opportunity here.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and just as a fun fact, I still faint. If I'm looking at the surgical site, I'm fine. But if I'm hands-on, I'm still a fainter. So if anyone needs to take a bit of comfort, don't let a little hurdle like that direct your career off the path you wanted it to go. I still like anesthesia. I still like being in the theatres. I just do not enjoy touching the bits that you don't usually see of the patient. So yeah, I just don't want anyone to feel put off by that.
Well, thanks, Courtney. That's really interesting. I think, probably for our listeners, it's interesting for them to understand where we've come from, how we've arrived at this point. And that then obviously begs the question, what are we going to do from here? What are we going to do now we're at Burtons? And I think I've got ideas. I think you've got ideas. So I'm just going to outline a few of my ideas before we wind this up, and also give some indication of some of the talks that we're looking to be doing in the future. So one of the things that really interests me, I've got quite involved in the last few years, maybe 10 years or so, in equine anesthesia and all of the difficulties and problems that presents. I've been very fortunate to be involved with some exciting projects. There are a couple of projects going on in America at the moment where I'm looking using the Tiffonius ventilator to perform new methods of ventilation, so new styles of ventilation, which are quite unique and different to what we're used to. I mean, some of them are very different compared to what we're used to. So I'm involved in a couple of research projects there. I'm also involved in a research project in Sweden, looking at the effect of nitric oxide inhaled during inspiration, and I've designed some equipment to help with that as well. So there's a lot of interesting novel research coming on, and also we're looking at improvements of the Tiffonius machine to even further open up the ability to design absolutely any mode of ventilation now. So this would be for horses, for dogs, for cats, for pigs, for sheep, for birds, anything, humans as well, so that we can tailor any ventilatory pattern to what that patient requires, or even to what we think may improve ventilation in those species. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to do that. Burtons is fully behind me on that. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is Burtons are fully behind you and I in this clinical team, that we can go out and support people, teach ventilation, teach monitoring and principles. I have to be honest, when I came through university, I really didn't enjoy the anaesthesia lectures. I didn't get much from it. It wasn't something I was particularly interested in. It's amazing that this is where I am now, where I spend all my spare time just absorbing information about anaesthesia, whereas during my university years, I couldn't get out the lectures fast enough. So yes. So as we said before, you never know where life's actually going to take you. So these are my ambitions, and the nice thing is that Burtons is offering this opportunity now with the resources and time behind us to take ventilation training to nurses, to vets, and give them, in a way, I kind of like to give them what I never had. Is that kind of the feeling you have about this project we have going on here at Burton?
Yeah, absolutely. I am quite similar to you in that I enjoyed the anaesthesia lectures, but I found by the time I was doing clinical rotations, I couldn't get out of the theatre fast enough, because I don't think I had the right supportive environment or people that were passionate about anaesthesia teaching me about anaesthesia. It was more just we're just going to get this done and get your book signed off and out you go. So it wasn't really a nurturing and supportive environment, oddly enough, by the time I got into my clinical rotations. So what I think as part of who I am, just, Courtney on the street versus Courtney in the vet clinic, is I just like to make people feel comfortable and to understand and support them, and not hold their hand and hold their hand and we'll go in together. It's more, oh, don't worry, you've got my support, you've got my passion and my excitement, and I'm not going to leave here until we're all just happy that you understand what's going on. Make it less scary. So my passion very much lies with almost like I want to get people excited about anaesthesia because I love it, so why wouldn't you love it? And in the same way, just take on a bit of a nurturing educational role. So let's just start from the bottom and let's work our way up from there. So that's what I quite like about being part of the Burtons team here, and then joining the clinical team with you, is I think that we're both didn't know we were going to be on these paths, but now that we're on it, we have the same view to go out. And I never got a ventilation lecture in my entire study, which is so strange.
I think that's so wrong, isn't it? Nurses should
crazy.
Have ventilation lectures. They should have even fundamentals about of how a ventilator, not necessarily a ventilator works, but how ventilation, the process of ventilation works. Positive pressure and just basic things. I think there's a huge hole out there. That's something we can fill.
And I think if you popped a textbook in front of me and said, read the difference between pressure ventilation and volume ventilation, what? And you almost become more standoff to learning because it seems so high tech and advanced when you read it in a book. You almost become like, too difficult, not even going to worry about it. Whereas if someone was just able to sit down with me and start from the bottom and just talk through it and make me feel safe about ventilation, you're really not going to do much harm if you know how to set things up and actually what's happening inside the patient. If someone had just done that, I think I felt completely different going through uni and going through my career in the early stages. I wouldn't have felt so in the dark. So that's what I really, not that I hope to bring, I know I will bring that to the industry. We'll go out together and start building the foundation knowledge. And with that comes the confidence. I just think a lot of people worry and panic about anaesthesia because they perhaps are just not sure or understand things properly. It seems a bit like voodoo. So I think
absolutely, and I think there's myths out there, Connie. I think there are myths about ventilation, about things that can go wrong or whatever. But there's also, I think, myths about some of the basic understanding. And I think you and I have talked about this before. About I'm going to give an example. About carbon dioxide and getting rid of CO2 from the body. And how I hate the term getting rid of CO2 because it took a long time to dawn on me, I have to be honest, that carbon dioxide being removed from the body isn't the be all and end all. Basically, that's a modulation system. The CO2 needs to be in the body to set the level of pH in the blood, and you just get rid of the excess or keep a little bit of it back, just so you keep the pH controlled. So I think, all through biology at school, university, the whole concept was, you breathe out CO2 to get rid of your CO2.
Get rid of it. Yeah, like CO2 is the bad guy.
Exactly. It's not the bad guy. It's an indicator of what's going on in the body. And I think, you and I want to bring this level of understanding in our podcast to the people that are going to be listening to it, those 2 or 3 people that are lonely on a bus in the evening. So we're going to talk to those guys. And on that vein, I kind of think, do you have some idea, or give the listeners some idea of the topics we're going to be covering in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately for both you and I, our passions lie with monitoring and ventilation. So I think we'll have a nice conversation exactly around what you just said before around carbon dioxide. So bring that back to capnography, monitoring our patients that way. If we stay on our ventilation chat, I think learning about dead space, dead space is bad, but actually how much dead space is bad? Dead space, what should we be doing for our patients that have a bit of dead space in their breathing system? Is it okay in a dog and not in a cat? But why? Why is it not okay?
And I think there's myths buried in there as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, myths being very black and white without anyone having a good old chat about it. So I think if we can, talk about dead space, we talk about pre-oxygenation and the functional reserve capacity of the lungs. We know we must pre-oxygenate our patients, but what's that actually bringing to our patients? What is that residual capacity in the lungs? That will be really interesting.
What's the actual physiological benefit? What's the physical benefit? What are the implications of pre-oxygenation, and what does it mean for the patient? Great. Yeah, I think these are topics that we really look forward to covering, and more as well. So
and more. Yeah, my favourite part of anaesthesia is definitely I really like the monitoring side of things. So I would love to talk to our listeners about ECGs, how to make sure you can get the best trace and how to actually use the machine properly to get something more than just a few squiggly lines, and where do those lines actually come from within our patient.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the thing with monitoring it, and I hope we'll cover this in our future podcast, if you're going to monitor something, there are some prerequisites, really. You must, be able to recognize what you're seeing and see a deviation from normal. If you see a deviation from normal, what does it mean, and how do you deal with it? Otherwise, if you can't fulfill those 3 criteria, there's no point in monitoring. There's no point having a nice capnograph that says it's got an end tidal of 76, but if you keep sitting there staring at it with an end tidal of 76, then there's no point in monitoring. It's understanding what it is and how you deal with it. So we're
absolutely.
You and I are going to cover these basic understanding principles. Not, okay, if you have a hypercapnia, do this, but you do this because, and explain why that's the process that we're going to go through. I think between you and I, it's going to be a very, very interesting and exciting next few months as our podcasts develop. So thank you for talking with me this morning and getting this out to our listeners, and we'll be back very soon.
Yes, thanks, Keith. It's been good to chat. So I'm really excited to get started for our next few episodes.
Okay. Bye now.
See you later. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Don't forget to follow our podcast on Spotify to stay up to date with the latest episode, and feel free to share with your team. If you have any questions or feedback for us, or simply want to know more about what you've just heard, please send us an email to clinicalsupport@burtons.uk.com. Catch you next time.